Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Quran Seminar team to the fourth gathering of the Quran Seminar Colloquium Series, which is under the auspices of the Mellon Sawyer Grant, being hosted here at the University of Notre Dame. Our co-directors are Professor Gabriel Reynolds and Dr. Mehdi Azaiz in the back. My name is Hamza Zafar. I'm one of the fellows with the project. The Quran Seminar is a project that brings together 27 scholars of the Quran from the United States, Canada, and Europe to discuss 50 selected passages of the Quran from a variety of approaches, methodological approaches. This project will culminate in the production of 2 volumes as well as a website. The first event of our gathering is this lecture. This is the fourth gathering, as I mentioned earlier. Today I'm introducing Dr. Shawkat Toorawa, who joins us from Cornell University. Over there, he's a professor of Arabic literature and Islamic studies. His background, his training is in Arabic literature from the University of Pennsylvania, where he worked on 9th century Arabic written culture, Baghdadi written culture. Although an Arabic literature remains the focus of his work, although that doesn't quite capture the full dimension of his scholarly portfolio. One aspect of which is translation. As he would say it, it's something he thinks about. And within translation, he's an active translator. He's somebody who writes about the activity of translation. He's translated numerous texts from Mauritian Creole, Spanish, and most importantly, Quranic texts, surahs from the Quran, which have been published in the Journal of Quranic Studies. Most significantly, right now, he's working on the Library of Arabic Literature project, which is a project that's embarking basically on translating several key canonical pre-modern Arabic texts. And over the course of the next 5 years, the aim is to translate 35 texts from this pre-modern canon. The title of the talk today is How Not to Translate the Quran. As I said earlier, Dr. Toorawa thinks about translation, so he's going to share some of those thoughts with us today about his methodology and the questions that are important to him in this task. Professor Toorawa is one of my most cherished teachers and closest mentors at Cornell, so it's a great pleasure and an honor to introduce him here today. Please join me in welcoming him.
En el nombre de Allah, el misericordioso, el compasivo, las alabanzas a Allah, Señor de los mundos, el misericordioso, el compasivo, Rey del día de la retribución, solo a ti te adoramos, solo en ti buscamos ayuda. Guíanos por el camino recto, el camino de los que has favorecido, no el de los que son motivo de ira ni el de los extraviados. That was the opening passage of the Quran in a Spanish translation, with which I decided to open, in part because I won't be speaking about translations in Spanish. One of the difficulties about a presentation such as this, and I'm very grateful to Professor Gabriel Reynolds for inviting me, and grateful to you for coming out on this chilly day to listen to my probably largely inchoate thoughts. But one of the difficulties is that the Quran has been translated into every language, or almost every language, in which people conduct activity. And so at one level, a conversation or a discussion about the translation of the Quran into English is an impoverished way to approach the study of the translation of the Quran. But since I haven't learned all the languages of the world, although I see my dear friend Devin Stewart here, who's probably learned half of them, it's not really given to me to speak about the activity other than in a few, so I've confined myself to English, although we can perhaps talk in the Q&A about some of the other languages into which translators have tried to put the Quran. I haven't prepared a specific talk today because I wanted to sort of walk you through some thinking and walk you through some texts. So with the collaboration of Hamza, who designed this beautiful PowerPoint, I'm going to let the PowerPoint slides remind me and guide me. You also have a handout. I hope you've resisted reading it, but if you have, haven't, then we'll get to the things that you've been reading shortly. One feature of the Quran that I think people often forget about is the imagery which is associated with it. When you read and you hear about the fact that Islam is supposedly aniconic, that imagery is not connected to, well, certainly figural representation is not part of Islamic culture. It's all not true. But besides the fact that it's not true, what is true is that Qurans are frequently very, very carefully illuminated. They're made quite beautiful. Even this Quran in Spanish, which I'm happy to show you later, I would show it to you now, but you'd look at it and then not listen to me. It's attractive. It's decorated in a particular way. And it's a text that's important to people, and it's important to the people who produce them to make them nice or lovely or beautiful or something to admire and to respect. So this is one of any number of millions of examples that one can find of the way in which a text might be translated. Because, of course, the Quran is believed by Muslims to be the Word of God. God is beyond all human capacity to imagine. His language, by definition, is a language unique to God. This is God's Word in the human Arabic language. So this is a translation, as it were, of God's Word. When I teach my Introduction to the Quran classes, one of the things I like to say is there's this passage in the Quran which refers to the Lawh Mahfuz, this celestial tablet, or this place where it's recorded, and I remind them that one of the reasons we think of it as a tablet is because we ourselves are freighted by the way we think about recording of information. And for many centuries, that's how people thought about it. And I urge them to think about it as a CD, or as a flash drive, and as a data set that then gets sent down in the Muslim teaching through the angel Gabriel, who must be pretty cool because he seems to be able to translate all of these into all these languages. So that there is an act of translation that takes place even here. This is not something that a lay Muslim would concede easily, because there's a strong, a powerful ideology and theology of this being God's unadulterated word. And that's not what I'm here to talk about. But for my purposes, or rather, from my perspective, this too is a form of translation. And so in translating the text, a lot of care is taken, and a lot of love and adoration is exhibited in producing it. So this first right-hand side is the passage I read in Spanish, and is the opening of the Quran, or the prolegomenon, or there's a lot of discussion about what exactly it's doing, where it is. Now, there have been some other extremely interesting attempts to bring the visual into dialogue with the written. This is an image produced by hand, one currently of 400, by an American artist called Sandow Burke. And what he's done is he's gone through and illustrated different parts of the Quran. His intention is to complete them all. I'll be meeting him, thanks to the art history department at Cornell, who've invited him to learn more about it. But let me just read to you what it says on his website. Unlike the Gospels of the New Testament, which relate narratives of Jesus' ministry on earth, the Holy Quran is believed to be the verbatim words of God as communicated through the angel Gabriel to Muhammad in the 7th century CE. Collected together and grouped generally according to length rather than chronologically, the 114 chapters, surahs, form a collection of sermon-like revelations that are the fundamental text of Islam, the fastest growing religion in America. At a time when the United States is involved in 2 wars against Islamic nations and declares itself to be in a cultural and philosophical struggle against Islamic extremists, American artist Sandow Burke's latest project considers the Quran as it was intended, as a universal message to humankind. If the Quran is indeed a divine message to all peoples, he ponders, what does it mean to an individual American in the 21st century? How does the message of the Quran relate to us as Americans in this life, in this time? What is this message that we have spent so much blood and treasure fighting against? And how can the message of the Quran be applied to contemporary American life? In short, what might the Quran mean to contemporary Americans? From that starting point, Sandow Burke has spent the past 5 years creating a personal Quran. Following the traditions of ancient Arabic and Islamic manuscripts, the artist has been hand-transcribing the entire English translated text of the Quran, as was done in centuries past, following traditional guidelines as to the colors of inks, the formatting of the pages, the size of margins, and the illuminations of page headings and medallions marking verses and pages and passages. His hand-lettered calligraphy uses an American tradition of writing, that of the street letters of urban graffiti that he finds around his Los Angeles neighborhood. Once each chapter is transcribed, he then seeks to illuminate the text and its message with scenes from contemporary American life, investigating how the message relates to our lives in the United States today. Adapting the techniques and stylistic devices of Arabic and Persian paintings and albums, his works blend the past with the present, the East with the West, creating a, quote, American Quran. So here you have an artist engaged in translating the Quran for an American readership. And yet, he hasn't been involved at all in the actual translation of the passages. For that, he's relied on a whole collection of different translators. He's gone to translations, picked ones that he's liked, and then hand-transcribed them. But as I'm sure you'd agree, the major intervention here in this act is visual. Even without reading the text, people familiar with the Quran, whether it is people who are familiar with it through as end users, liturgically, or scholars, won't take long to work out what it is. There are 7 people and a dog buried underground in the lower right-hand corner. This is evidently Surah Kaf, Surah 18, and it's one of the panels that he's drawn of it. And when you read that text, and you look at the images, which you can't help but do as you read the text, they both inform each other in ways that are sometimes truly surprising. And so I urge you to go to his website, it's just his name, Sandow, Burke, and have a look at some of this. Let me show you a few more images. This is from the next chapter, Surah Maryam, or chapter 19, Mary, and that's a scene. I guess it's an LA scene. You've got some of the words covered by the text, but it's fairly clear that he wants us to know that it's a Hispanic or a Latinate environment. There are other, you see the palm trees up there, and if you read the surah and you pay attention to a lot of its imagery, you discover that he has placed that imagery within each frame. And so there are little palm trees here. There's one that I'm not sure I'll be showing it to you, but Hamza and I were admiring one today where he remembered to put all the way around a specific thing that appeared in. I have a third one. This is one of my favorite. I wish my dear friend and colleague Mundar Yunus was here, because he's done a lot of very daring work, actually I would call it daring, on this chapter, Al-Adiyat. And I'm going to read this one because this one will make the point, I hope, about the relationship between Sandow Burke's translation of the surah into a modern American image and what the surah says. By the chargers snorting, striking sparks of fire, attacking in the morning, leaving dust behind them, and clearing midway through any host, mankind is indeed ungrateful to his Lord, and he himself knows it. For he is sure violent in love of worldly goods. Doesn't he know that what is in the graves, when what is in the graves shall emerge, and what is in hearts is found out, that your Lord will know everything? And then you've got the shadows of the cars to evoke the morning. The chargers, it's a word about which there isn't complete agreement. I mean, the tradition believes that it's a reference to charging horses, that maybe it's a raid. But any of you, I don't know how many of you have been to a NASCAR event, but what's wonderful about this frame is he's also, the artist is anticipating what the surah already describes. No cars are charging into anyone here, but the imagery that's evoked, unfortunately, is of scenes that we've all seen of NASCAR cars skidding off the tracks, potentially going into the crowd, sundering, right? So that the image is actually presaged in the Quranic surah is actually presaged in the image, as opposed to being just represented in the image. If I were any good at drawing anything other than stickmen, this is what I would do with my life. I would sit down and I would illustrate the Quran. Something I've always wanted to do, because I've always felt that we don't have sufficient additional information when we consume it. So scholars go about their work trying to provide context, trying to provide etymology, trying to provide commentary. And those are, and that's fine, and those are theological and scholarly and academic interventions. But there are other kinds of interventions. And for example, when it's recited, there are many recitational styles. There are styles where someone can recite and the audience can respond. You have reciters repeating the same line 10 or 12 times because the audience is so happy with that recitation and not worrying about continuing. And this could, if scrutinized carefully, this calls into question the whole notion of the integrity of the text. It isn't necessarily just sequentially recited or always bound and kept in one volume. You can have pieces of Qur'an on the wall. You can have pieces of Qur'an inscribed. You can be wearing Qur'an. That's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about translation. So let's start with a rather unusual one. Now, this is a book that I found using that great false god, Google. I Googled rhyme and Qur'an because this happens to be one of my interests. And I found out that this book existed, and I tried to borrow it through interlibrary loan, but no member of interlibrary loan owned it. No library, academic library in the United States owned this book. So I bought it. And the surah that I have put up here is a very short surah that you have on your handout. And I just want to show you the kinds of things that people are doing with, and of course are entitled to do, with the Qur'an. Allah, or the father of flame, in name of God, most gracious, merciful, perish hands of father of flame, perish he, no profit to claim, from all his wealth and all his gain, burnt soon will he be in a fire, of blazing flame his wife the bane, shall bear the crackling wood's desire as fuel. And so a twisted rope of palm leaf fiber without hope around her own neck for her blame. I probably don't need to say too much about the quality of this translation. But this gentleman has tried to rhyme, and he's done it with what, as far as I can tell, are the best of motives. It says on the back, this rhymed versification and sonnet contemplation of the Qur'an brings the beloved and I to a climax. It finishes a work that includes in the same format the handling of the entire Bible, deuterocanonical books, Enoch, Jubilees, and some apocryphal Gospels. It is the fourth movement of a work that begins with the Torah, that is the Torah, continues through the Zabur, that is the Psalms, and the Injil, the Gospels, to find the ultimate revelation of God in the Holy Qur'an. Thomas McKellen is Associate Professor of Comparative Religion at the University of Stockholm and lives with his family in the East Central Lake District of Finland. I think the title, The Beloved and I, reveals a lot about this translation. I mean, it is an act of love. All translations are acts of love. And the main reason a translation is an act of love is because it's thankless. Because what happens is you produce a translation. It takes you 5 years to produce a translation. You present it to your peers, you present it to your colleagues, you present it to the world, and people say, well, anyone can translate. You know, how hard is it to translate? Well, okay, if you concede that it's not hard, the difficulty then becomes ensuring that it doesn't come out like this. Because even though a huge amount of effort has been put into this, first of all, it's nothing like the Arabic. But even if it were, there's something amiss, right? And we have to work out what it is. Now, it's possible to do things without having them be amiss. And I prepared to do something today, not knowing that it would be close to Mahdi's heart. But here goes. Quand nous trois nous pour rejoindre, dans garbar pour casse nous yen, quand violence fin rancemanger, quand la guerre fin gagnasser, quand soleil prêt pour coucher, côte ça, dans Carole à l'ouest, là-bas même pour joindre Macbeth. Quand nous trois nous pour rejoindre, dans garbar pour casse nous yen, when shall we three meet again, in thunder, lightning, or in rain, when the hurly-burly's done, when the battle's lost and won? There, that will be ere the set of sun, where the place, upon the heath, there to meet with Macbeth. It is possible to translate something sublime into another language and to convey the cadence and the movement and the beauty of the original. That was a Mauritian Creole translation that not only tried to keep the cadence of the English, but it actually uses the same rhyme sound. When shall we three meet again? Quand nous trois nous pourrons when. And in doing so, evokes the original. One of the great things about doing something like that is once you've done it, you no longer have to do it. So David Rasami, after he's done that with the opening, and it's a particularly important one too, because it is an incantation that is being recited by the witches. It's not just any language. It's a specific kind of speech, and it rhymes in the English. By doing that, he's then absolved himself from ever doing it again. He can now embark on his translation knowing that the reader understands that he's attuned to this. I am attuned to the language. I am sensitive to it, and I'm going to do it where I can. Now, I'm asking for your trust as I move on. And so, something like rhyming like this, the problem here is Thomas McElwin has become enslaved by the rhyme. He hasn't been liberated by it, but become enslaved by it. Okay, enough Macbeth. Well, there can never be enough Shakespeare. But I'm just saying. Okay, fine, there isn't enough, so let me read you something else. Nous sommes louanges, bon Dieu, Seigneur l'univers, toi-même qui pardonnes nous tout, toi-même qui comprends nous tout, Seigneur gisement dernier, nous venons à toi et supplie-toi, viens, aide-nous, guide-nous par l'eau beau si main qui garantit ta bénédiction, aide-nous, évite si main qui attire ta colère, aide-nous, évite si main perdition. That's the Fatiha, the opening of the Quran, which I read in Spanish earlier, and there it is in Mauritian Creole. The next, for those of you who know French, you'll appreciate this, the next surah's translation is called Vas, V-A-S, Vas, which is the cow, la vache, ou bakara. All right, if you would please turn now to the handout. Actually, no, let me show you this first. So, sorry, it's the same surah, but, so you saw one translation. There it is in the Arabic on the left. For those of you who don't know the surah, let me just read it. There's this opening benediction or formula, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, is the most widely circulated translation. I say, full of compassion, ever compassionate. And then it reads, Tabbat yada abi lahabin wa tab, ma aghna anhu maluhu wa ma kasab, sayasla naran dhata lahab, wa mara'atuhu hammalat al-hatab, fi jidiha hablum min masad. So the rhyme sounds are ab, ad. And there was an extra up there. So you know. And this on the right is a translation by Arthur Jeffrey, relying on Richard Bell's notes and translation. And it was published decorated. And when you borrow the book, it says very clearly on the front, it's translated by Jeffrey and decorated by, I think the man's name is Bimbley. It was very important to him to have it be decorated as he packaged it. It also has a little explanation at the beginning. And one of the things that you find in academic translations of the Quran is academics unwilling to let go of providing a context to the reader, right? The idea that I need to help the reader understand. You do not find this in Arabic Qurans ever. I'm not aware of any Arabic-only Quran having little passages explaining what's going on. Similarly, you don't have, and I spared you, but maybe I shouldn't have, you don't have the translation followed by a much longer series of sonnets about the surah. Although, to be fair, one of the most widely circulated translations in the world, and I dare say among Anglophone Muslims in many parts of the world, one of the most widely respected, is Abdullah Yusuf Ali's translation. It now circulates in a version that is produced by the King Fahd Quran Complex Publication something, which is the Saudis. And what they've done is they've gone through and they've taken out all the notes that they find objectionable that Yusuf Ali produced. But more importantly, they've taken out his sonnets and his poems, because he actually did precede every surah with a verse summary of what was coming next. So I don't mean to put down Thomas McElwin. It's kind of unusual to have this. And it is running throughout the text. So Yusuf Ali would have the title, have a little verse translation, a verse, and then the surah proper would start. But this is just a continuous text, so that one can't really avoid it. And it's quite unusual. So after I see her walking on the street along the river, waiting at stoplights. Now, in a way, he's doing what Sandow Burke is doing, but he's doing it with words. Because he's doing it with words, he's running much greater risks. Let's come back to this. So, Abu Lahab, father of a flame, was the kin name of Muhammad's uncle, Abdul Uzza, who with his wife, Jamil, was among the most serious opponents to Muhammad's claim to be a prophet. I don't know why I'm reading up there, I could be reading it down here. This little passage is usually taken to be a curse on his uncle, beginning, "May the hands of Abu Lahab perish." Optative, may something happen. A curse brought forth by Abu Lahab's having strewn thorns in the path where Muhammad is walking. Jacob Barth, however, has shown good grounds for taking it to be a Medinan passage, a little paean of joy called forth by the sudden death of Abu Lahab a few days after the Battle of Badr. And there's the scholar saying, he's citing his authority, saying this is what I think is going on, and therefore he translated the two hands of Abu Lahab have perished, not may the hands of Abu Lahab perish. Right? So it was important to the translator not only to provide the context, but to justify a decision that he has made about the opening line, which is not a widespread view. It is certainly entirely defensible, but it's not a widespread view. The two hands of Abu Lahab have perished, and he has perished. His wealth profited him nothing, nor that which he gained. He will roast at a fire, the possessor of a flame, and his wife will be the carrier of the fuel, about her neck a rope of palm fiber. I don't know what it means to roast at a fire, but maybe he was trying to do it. At any rate, there it is. So that's one, or two. You've seen McElwain's. Now I'd like you to look at two more on the handout, if you would. I think Hamza very helpfully has them on here as well. So the first one, which is A, in the name of God, well, the 111th Surah of the Qur'an, known by the title Masad or Lahab. These are the two titles. In the name of God, merciful to all, compassionate to each. Perish the hands of Abu Lahab and perish he. His wealth shall not avail him, nor what he earned. He shall be scorched by a fire ablaze. As to his wife, carrying the faggots, around her neck is a rope of fiber. You know, one of the tests for a... Oops. Sorry, what I...
I think click no.
Thank you. One of the tests for me for a translation of the Quran is I give it to my 16-year-old. And I say, does this make sense to you? And if it doesn't, it's out. Because it strikes me that a 10th grader at Ithaca High should understand English. And so I remember I showed this to my daughter, and she looked at me and she said, "Really?" And I think she meant the last few lines. And I said, well, it's British. It's British. It's okay. Next. The hands of Abu Lahab will perish and he will perish. And now notice that in this translation, unlike this one, the opening formula is treated as part of the surah. In the second one, it's in italics to set it off. And there is some discussion within the scholarship about that relationship as well. The hands of Abu Lahab will perish and he will perish. So here, again, it's not a wish. His possessions and gains will be of no avail to him. He will roast in a flaming fire, and his wife, the carrier of firewood, with a rope of palm fiber on her neck. So, my daughter felt the same way I felt about this one. It all makes sense until line 4. I don't understand why it says, with a rope of palm fiber on her neck. What with a rope of palm fiber on her neck? The wife? What's she going to do? Is she going to roast? What's happening? And I said, well, but the Arabic's like that. And she said, but it's not English. And that is the key when you're translating. The key is, if you're translating, then translate. If you're not translating, and you're just simply trying to produce a text that when the Arabic scholar looks at it, can see the Arabic text behind it, which is how scholarly translation works within the context of an article, say, that's fine. You're entitled to do that. In fact, you're probably encouraged to do that. It's important to know what you're trying to do. And you have examples of literal translations, word-by-word translation. Professor Reynolds here uses a translation that I like very much, which is a phrase-by-phrase translation, which isolates the phrase. And so you can look at a phrase and say, okay, that's what the Arabic has at this point. But it's heuristic, it's scholarly, it's academic. It's not English. It's not Macbeth. Right? It's not Quand nous trois nous pourrons jouer. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't move you. And if you can learn, if you learn one thing from a Muslim who enjoys listening to the Quran, the one thing you learn is that it moves them to tears. It transports them. And it's not delusion. The text is beautiful when it's recited. How to get that across to an Anglophone reader? How does an Anglophone reader begin to appreciate some of that? It seems to me the only way to do it is to pay attention to sound. Because words, this will come as no surprise to you, consist of sounds. And the Quran is an orally recited, performed text. Some would argue, I think with good reason, that it was only ever delivered orally. Initially, it was like sermons, like homilies, speeches, lectures, and exhortations. These are all done orally, and they're done performatively, like I'm doing now. Tabat yada abi lahabin wa tab. Not tabat yada abi lahabin wa tab ma aghna anhu, right? I mean, it's very different. Right, so, next one. Oh, and I should just alert you to the fact that the translation, fiber, palm fiber, Abu Lahab. So, even at the very beginning, you have a problem. Do you call à la recherche du temps perdu, in search of lost time, or do you do the unthinkable and use a line from a Shakespeare sonnet and translate it, remembrance of things past? Do you try to tie it to your tradition, or do you try to convey what it means? The title alone is going to set the stage. If we started calling the Quran the recitation, or the liturgy, it would change the way we interacted with the text. I'm not proposing that we do, but I'm saying that's what would happen. I suppose I should keep track of time, because I just go on and on. In the name of God, full of compassion, ever compassionate. This translator uses merciful and compassionate to translate Rahman and Rahim. This translator uses merciful and compassionate. This translator uses full of compassion, ever compassionate, because this translator is attentive to the fact that the words Rahman and Rahim are related etymologically. Abu Lahab and his power both will expire. He will not be saved by wealth or the profits he may acquire. He will be plunged into Lahab, a flaming fire. And his woman, that kindling carrier, will wear about her neck a halter of palm fiber. This translator, me by the way, has attempted to rhyme expire, acquire, fire, carrier, fiber. I wanted fiber because I wanted a B in one of the rhyme words. Because there was a B. B is the principal rhyme in the Arabic. I didn't translate Lahab because I decided to call the surah Abu Lahab, because even though it is known as Lahab or Masad, it's actually about a guy called Abu Lahab. And the pun is on his name. It's a pun. It's a play on words. If this is historically true, it doesn't matter. As a surah, this is the belief that he was called the father of fire, right? This is what Jeffrey tells us. Father of a flame. So I thought, okay, let me call it Abu Lahab. And then let me explain that, let me use Lahab, so that the one word in the Arabic surah, which is the key word, occurs in English, but then is explained. Because I am translating. The burden on me is to translate. And I'm trying to translate the pun, which I can't. Because his name wasn't fire or flame. His name was an Arabic name. So that was my attempt. Now, I showed this to friends. In fact, Devin, I think, was present in Abu Dhabi when we presented this. And on my right and on my left, I had the tremendous joy and the great misery of having James Montgomery and Tahir Qutbuddin. And both of them immediately leaned over and made notes on my text and said, no, you know what? You should maybe just call it Lahab, not Abu Lahab. And are you sure you want to say Abu Lahab will expire? You sure you want to say may he perish or may he expire? Because after all, it's supposed to be a wish. And then Tahir said, what about the shriveling of the hands? Isn't that the dominant image? Shouldn't there be a hand? So here you've got these other people intervening immediately. And they're all right. We're all right. All of us are correct. But we have to make decisions. Sometimes the decision you make is to just abandon something. You're not always going to be able to get everything. And thinking that you will is a mistake. But the biggest mistake that's made, in my view, is translators who don't rhyme. 99 out of 100 people will say to me, whether they're translators or whether they are people responding to this, they say, well, aren't you sacrificing the meaning? And I say, first of all, don't function under the delusion that you aren't sacrificing meaning when you try to translate the meaning. Okay. Second of all, you're sacrificing the sound. So I don't get it. is meaning more important than sound? And of course they say, of course it is. And I say, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. And here's why. If you turn the page and you look at the second surah. By the sky and the night star, what can describe the night star? It is a piercing visitor from afar. There is indeed no soul without a sentinel. Let humans ponder how they got their start. They started from a flowing spurt, issuing between loin and breastbone. God has all power to resuscitate, that day when secrets are made known, when humanity shall have no strength, no support. Yea, by the sky's resuscitating torrents, by the earth's bursting plants. These words are a decisive pronouncement, not idle merriment. Let them scheme and wile. I too will scheme and wile, and grant the disbelievers respite. Grant them respite a short while. Right. This is a pretty famous surah, and I have just recently translated it, or finished translating it, and this is actually about to appear for everyone to attack in the Journal of Quranic Studies. I just want to walk you through some of the things. So you'll need to look at both that and both your handout and what's on the screen. Let me just point out a few things on the screen. I have a nifty thing here. So this and these boxed words have boxed the active participle in Arabic. Right? Tariq, thaqib, hafiz, dafiq. These two words here, this one here, and this one here, aren't active participles, but contain the active participle in them. The active participle shape in them. Sara'ir and tara'ib. So in looking at the surah and deciding to translate it, I thought, okay, what are the things about the surah? What are the sounds? What are the features I need to be attentive to? So one of them is the active participle ending. The other is the presence of Q, which is in blue here. The letter Qaf appears throughout the surah, less and less, but very, very frequently in the very first few lines. Okay. There's also the long vowels A. Now, for the scholars here, I've transliterated this in a way that non-Arabists would be able to read it. So, Sama, Ta, Ma, Adra, Ta, Ha, Ha, I thought to myself, okay, something is going on, right? There's something going on with sound. And then certain words are repeated. So underlined words get repeated. Khuliq, khuliq, tariq, tariq. Raj here and Raj here. That and that. And then in the end, a very famous repetition. إِنَّهُمْ يَكِيدُونَ كَيْدًا وَأَكِيدُ كَيْدًا. And then فَمَحِّلِ الْكَافِرِينَ أَمْهِلْهُمْ رُوَيْدًا. Okay. So, here's how I did it. My choice of night star to render the title and first two N words rested principally on my preference for a word containing the letters and sounds N, R, S, S, T, and T. I then also used those very sounds, especially R, S, and T, to render the N words in verses 3, 5, 6, and 8, all of which are connected to verses 1 and 2, and to each other in the Arabic by the presence of a dominant Q. The correspondences then are Tariq, night star, Thaqib, afar, Khuliq, start, Dafiq, spurt, Qadir, restore. In rendering the end word in verse 3, Thaqib, I opted for a rhyme placing afar immediately after night star. I also interpolate piercing visitor, which allows me to redeploy the letters N, R, S, and T, right, visitor, and to gesture toward a tariq's literal meaning, rendered by translators as night comer or night intruder, night visitant. And those are the common translations of the surah's title, because the tariq is supposedly this night visiting star that allows you to. The spurt of verse 6 echoes preceding N words with R, S, and T sounds, but also the repeated active participle morphology. So the active participle in English is not a factor. We don't operate that way in English. But by using certain sounds, I duplicate a duplicated effect in Arabic with a duplicated sound in English. The N word of verse 4, Hafiz, shares no letters with the three preceding N words, but it does share a morphology as a Form 1 active participle. I rely on the deployment of N, S, and T in sentinel to evoke this morphological correspondence. As with night star, I capitalize sentinel, and you'll see that in your thing. Capitalization draws attention and can produce emphasis, both desirable, it seems to me, in translating the surah. I capitalize sky, visitor, humanity, day, power, pronouncement, and disbelievers, right? So I'm able to do something that English does, that Arabic doesn't, to draw attention to certain words. The N words in verse 7 and 9 are not active participles, but a plural pattern. Of interest, however, is the fact that the plural incorporates the shape and sound of the active participle. I therefore chose another N word that includes S, R, and T, namely breastbone, which has the virtue of also including N. It is true that verse 9, on the other hand, has no N, R, S, or T. This is because I decided that here it was more important to echo the repeated plural pattern, one found in verses 7 and 9 alone, and so opted for a rhyme, but with N brought back in, so breastbone and made known. So I've abandoned one principle in favor of another. And I could go on, but I won't. I will instead take us to this. You've seen the final product. So the one I gave you, the one I showed you, is about to appear in the Journal of Quranic Studies. I've already corrected the proofs. This is how it starts. This is Surah Ghashiyah. So I sat down and I wrote down on this side, and I'm sorry, this is not going to be too obvious to the non-Arabists. So you'll have to take my word and their endorsing word for it. But Ghashiyah, Khashiyah, but then Nasiba is not exactly the same, right? Because it's not a soft iya type thing, but Hamiyah is. So I moved Nasiba there. And then Dariya and Ju'. And then Na'ima is like Nasiba because it begins with the noon. But then Radiya, Aliyah, Laghiya, Jariya like Ghashiyah again. And then Marfu'a, Mawdu'a, Masfufa, Mabthutha. Sorry, Quranically that would be Mabthutha, right? There. And then Khuliqat, Rufi'at, Nusibat, Sutihat. And then Mudakkir, Musaitir, Wakafar, Al-Akbar. And this is Iyabuhum, Hisabuhum. I ran out of space. And then I circled words that are hapaxes. Because one of the other things that interests me in looking at the Quran is words that occur only once in the Quran. These are known as hapaxes or hapaxes. And I always pay attention to them. And so I circle them. It's Namarik and Zarabi and Sutihat. Just so that when I'm trying to come up with a translation, I pay attention to certain things. Now, these are my early attempts. Have you had word of the concealment? And I have despondent and languescent and all kinds of other things. And the reason I'm using words like languescent is because I'm going to try to find a word that will be a hapax, that if one were to translate the whole Quran, or if I were to translate it, I would want that word to also be unique. It doesn't matter to me that it be the same word, the identical word. But it would matter to me, I think, I've not decided to do this, but that if there were 342 hapaxes in the Arabic Quran, that there'd be 342 in the English. It wouldn't matter whether they corresponded exactly. Right? So I was playing around with this. It took me a while. And what you have on the handout is what I decided on. And it's still subject to input. And so I'm happy to take any and all feedback. Have you had word of the enfoldment, a day when faces will be diffident, laboring and defeated, admitted into a fire vehement, given drink from a fountain fulminant? For food they shall have only thorny bracken, that neither satisfies nor fattens. A day too of faces delighted, their effort a source of contentment, in a lofty garden recumbent, free of idle rant, graced with a fountain effluent, and with couches laid out, cups passed about, cushions set out, and carpets spread out. Mabthutha. Do they really not wonder how camels were fashioned? How the high heavens were fastened, how the mountains were battened, and the level earth flattened? Go ahead, remind, you were sent to remind, not to oversee and mind. But if any turn away and abjure, the punishment from God will be the most severe. In the end, they return to us, and their accounting will depend on us. Now, you, I hope, have noticed the rhyme. So this is the only question I'm going to ask you. How many of you noticed that there's an F in almost every verse? It doesn't matter whether you did, because even though you didn't necessarily consciously, you are recording F sounds throughout. Have you had word of the enfoldment, a day when faces will be diffident, laboring and defeated, admitted into a fire vehement, given drink from a fountain fulminant? For food they shall have only thorny bracken that neither satisfies nor fattens. A day too of faces delighted, their effort a source of contentment, in a lofty garden recumbent, free of idle rant, graced with a fountain effluent, and with couches laid out, cups passed about, cushions set out, and carpets spread out. No F's, because I wanted to mark a radical shift into a different rhyme scheme. Not only with the ending, but also with the absence of F's, which have been gathering. Do they really not wonder how camels were fashioned, how the high heavens were fastened, how the mountains were battened and the level earth flattened? Now there's no F in battened in verse 19. Even though it battened rhymes with flattened, but battened if you were to look at the Arabic, actually gestures back to an earlier use of the same Arabic word, same root earlier on. So that is one way one might translate the Quran. I think it's important for me to just say about the title. It was initially going to be titled How to Translate the Quran. I realized on looking at it that it sounded like I had some kind of insight on how to translate the Quran. I do not. And I certainly wouldn't want to tell someone else how to do it. I have ideas of how not to translate the Quran. But knowing how much effort it takes, I cannot imagine chastising someone for anything other than something sloppy. And there is some sloppiness out there, and that I'm happy to point out. But it's a supreme effort to translate. So, being ambivalent, I thought I would say how not to translate the Quran. Really, if I had to retitle this, I would call it How to Translate the Quran. This last image is of you asking me questions.
We have a few minutes to ask questions before we have a reception outside, so if you have questions, now's the time. Yes?
How long does it typically take you to, like for example, Surah 88, how long did it take you from start to end to translate?
I haven't yet timed myself, and many people ask me that question, and so I'm going to do that with the next one I translate, because I'm myself interested in working out, what my wage would be if someone were paying me for it. But I can tell you, and I'll see if I can find it while I'm talking. I'm not good at multitasking. But I can tell you that what I usually do is I start with something like this, and then I set it aside. One of my teachers and mentors, Doj Maktisi, used to say, let it go cold, and then go back to it. About anything, not just about translation. And so I let it go completely cold to the point that I don't even remember why I would have done something like Languesin. And I think, what on earth was I thinking? Because I need to estrange myself from the translation, because once you do it, it's because it is a labor of love, you get attached to things. I like that word, it works. So let it go, I come back to it. That can sometimes be up to a year later. And so I think it takes me about a year from start to finish. But I have here, I'm trying to find if I have it in print, and I think I do. I translated Surah inside. The first Surah I ever translated into rhyme was Surah Insan, number 76. I was actually in Medina and in prayer. And the Imam was reciting a surah. And I was there with my family. And when we left, it was the Fajr, the morning prayer. When we left, my uncle says to me, what surah was that? And I said, I don't really know. And he said, well, how do we find out? And I said, well, Zanjabil was definitely a rhyme word. And so let's go to a bookshop and find Abdul Baqi, and I look it up. And so I found Abdul Baqi, which is a concordance. I looked it up, and Zanjabil is a hapax, and it occurs only in Surah 76. And I said, it's this surah. And I showed it to him, and he read it in English. And I read it in English with him, and I thought, boy, this is a terrible translation of the surah, which has this beautiful, insistent rhyme. So my uncle, without missing a beat, said, why don't you translate it? And I said, oh yeah, sure. And so I set about to translate it. He may not remember, but Devin Stewart and I worked on this. Here it is. In 1996, I decided to translate everything from Inshira. I also decided to return to a translation Devin Stewart and I had begun and abandoned in 1992. Right? I mean, I call my friends and say, what do you think we can do with this? Part of the difficulty is finding the rhyme word. And with Surah Insan, what I did is I wanted the exact same rhyme sound in English as Arabic. So every time it's R, and then a few L's and a few M, and I wanted R, L, and M in English. This took me a long time. When I was able to do that, I was then able to embark on the translation proper, as it were. Yeah. Trying to match that. But I'm happy to abandon a rhyme as well. I'm not at all, I translated Surah A'la initially rhyming in ing, and then abandoned it entirely and picked another rhyme sound because it wasn't working. Because I'm conscious of being, I believe I use the term in slaves, it's strong, but too beholden to a rhyme sound. I'm happy to. Sorry, the short answer is about a year. For about 15, 20 verses, about a year. Yes. Sorry.
In the chapter of the Ninth Star, I was just checking. Could you please turn back to the Arabic script? I thought that the vav,
It might be mistaken.
No, not at all. I was just wondering if you simply left out the vowel qasam, that is, the vowel and
Oh, what's samai? You mean the oath?
And I thought that was one of the most characteristic part of the surah. So I was thinking maybe you had a reason for this. And also I find that there's also another shift of the use of vav there, where it says, well, going all the way down until.
So which one? Sorry, go ahead.
Well,
which wow have I missed? Which wow?
No. I was just asking why you didn't highlight the vowels at the beginning.
Why I didn't highlight as repeated sounds.
Right.
Oh, I see. Yes, absolutely. Excellent.
Yeah, because it's one of the most characteristics.
Yeah. So what I did instead.
Yeah, and the second thing is when we come all the way down to wama huwa bihazid, or let's say what akidu, that one from the last one, I find it kind of a shift of the conjunction, because until now we all have the oaths, vowels that are taken, but here we have the conjunction as it is concessive, so we also not find a kind of word pun there.
Okay, I understand. Okay, so you're asking me why I just didn't highlight it in this form, in this sheet, right? Because it's in the translation. Right. By the sky, by the skies. Right? So it's just that I didn't point it out here. But you're right, I should, because this is not just a conjunction. This is an oath. This is the wow oath. So you're absolutely right about that.
And then it's also rhyming. So I was wondering if maybe you had a particular.
No, I didn't. I just neglected to highlight it here. But I have used the word by in the English to translate it, unless I'm misunderstanding it.
No, right.
But now, in terms of, and what I did do is because I think that the oath is strong, I added the word yea, which is not a word I use loosely, because it is a word that estranges a little for the reader. But I wanted to be clear that it was an assertive reassertion of the oath. And the problem with the English by is it doesn't really mean anything. It really is I swear by. And it's hard to go around saying I swear by in rendering this. And so that yea is meant to signal to the reader, in case they missed it in the beginning, that yes, it's something that I'm doing. And it also anticipates the first person pronoun in akidu keda, right? Because it's unusual to have the ana there for God's speech, so powerfully situated. And this yea is kind of preparing us for the fact that someone is actually going to say something quite powerful. The other was, so Stephen King once said that the path to hell is paved with adverbs. And he's right. If those of us who teach students will know that it's full of adverbs. Incredibly good, the writer was incredible. My belief is that the path to somewhere, as relates to Quran translators, is paved with and. Because Arabic uses and in a very different way from which English uses and, even when it's a conjunction. And for that matter, wa and for. And so I'm very conscious of not using and. I'm very, very conscious of it. Because it's just a natural instinct. It's true even in scholarly translation. There's an instinct to translate this as and. And I'm very unhappy about it. And you saw it in the Lahab translations, and is woman. It's complicated how you conjoin. In English, we would probably use commas, we might use semicolons. There are other ways in which we might deploy them. So that's another reason I'm a little uneasy with the work. Well, not uneasy, but I'm careful with the work.
Matthew, yeah. Thank you for this amazing intro. My question is, do you consider the rhythmic when you translate the text? I was thinking of couple to couple now. I don't know, this work on rhythmic in the Quran.
Yeah.
And sometimes in this translation, do you consider it?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
And again, if you'll indulge me, I'll just find an example of it because I don't have it memorized.
A good example is in the beginning you have the rhymes diffident, vehement, fulminant, right? And they're all like dash, yeah. It's a what is it, dactyl.
And you're the one who knows the names of these things, not me.
Well, the double thumb does not, but then enfoldment doesn't go.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Well, so I should point out, and I should say this, and this is important because it's very important to me. There's no translation I publish without acknowledging him. or Joe Lowry, because I send everything to Devin Stewart and Joe Lowry and I ask them, and they are ruthless.
And
they'll say things like, enrollment doesn't work.
we're completely useless.
No, but I mean, it's very important, right? I mean, translation is not a solitary activity and shouldn't be.
Sure.
You need to have other people. I ask my wife, I ask my daughter, and I ask my close friends and colleagues, is this working? What doesn't work? Because it's very important for the ear. And in the case of my wife and daughter, they don't know Arabic. They know the Surah, but they don't know Arabic. The case of Joe Lowry and Devin Stewart, they know the Arabic, they know the Surahs. I'm getting different kinds of feedback. I incorporate the feedback. Sometimes I do it, without having taken things into account. But in answer to, I think you're asking about something different, but I'm not sure. But listen to this. Did you not see how your Lord dealt with the people on elephant back? Did he not turn their ploy into an ineffectual attack? And cast upon them a celestial flock, that hurled upon them pebbles of Sijial rock. And did he not make them like a field star-struck? Now, it's not the same rhythm as the Arabic, but it's imposing its own rhythm and saying, this is going to be rhythmic in a particular way. Right? So I do try, but I can only do 912 things at one time. And so I really can only be attentive to, what I do is I rely on Devin, actually, and others to point out things like enfoldment not working. And so enfoldment's probably not going to stay. I'm probably going to abandon it. I'm probably going to, it's right, vehement, a three-syllable word that has the same, a three-syllable word that has the same stress pattern, right? Because it's enfoldment, not enfoldment. Now, it was concealment initially on here. Concealment. I just don't like concealment as the meaning of Ghashiyah. That's the problem. But it works in terms of sound. But it may be that I concede and do concealment because it'll satisfy the ear as opposed to the whatever else will satisfy.
I'm afraid we're out of time. But actually, Imran, if you want to ask a question.
One real quick one. I just wanted to mention also, I teach a Quran class, and we read Surah Al-Fil, actually, the chapter on the elephant this last semester was really tremendously enlightening. One more thing was, I asked a student of mine, I think just Monday, we were reading Surah 55, and full class, I thought we'd have a very kind of academic discussion. What's the most important thing about the surah? And a female student answered that it brings me to tears. And we were really just silenced at that moment. You're completely right. And with that, I wanted to ask you one quick question. Given the kind of emphasis on bringing the reader to tears, is that the goal? Do you have that in mind when you're writing this? Is that the purpose?
My translation?
Yes, your translation.
No, my translations are an attempt to get my friends, all of whom are academics, to have access to a translation that pays attention to sound. So that when they're teaching, Imran, they can say to their students, look, sound is a key component of many surahs in the Quran. Here's a translation that attempts to do this. So that the non-Arabophone reader has access to an aspect of the text that they would not otherwise have access to other than listening to it in the foreign language. That was my initial impetus. And that was with Surah Insan. I just felt terrible that people were going to read this and not hear Salsabil and Zanjabil and Qawarir and just this insistent, and quadriliterals and all kinds of things going on. And I then realized that there was also probably I don't want to say a market because I don't sell them, but a readership that was Anglophone, Muslim, that might be interested in hearing the Quran in a different way. And I have to say there's been a lot of resistance because a lot of people think I'm doing some kind of violence to the meaning. But that's because they live in this bubble where they think meaning is transferable in some translations. Yusuf Ali's got the meaning. Whatever. Abdul Halim got the meaning, and all the rest of us are laboring under some misimpression. I'm under no misimpression. I do not think that my translations are the best, or that it should be done this way, or that you get more out of them. I just think that if you want to know what some of the ways in which the Quran operates at a rhythmic, auditory, sound, rhyme level, then this is one way to access it in English. But it also, as you know from your own work, it also makes me think really hard about the source. This is how I got interested in hapaxes. Zanjabil's a hapax. Salsabil's a hapax. I thought, oh wow, there are these words that only occur once. Cool, who knew? And so, I think it's been helpful. Yves Bonnefoy, the great French poet, once said, On traduit pour mieux comprendre le texte. We translate better to understand the text. And that's been my experience, personal experience. Thanks for the question.
That, like,